I know that I'm a big Vivek Ramaswamy fan. You'll see why if you haven't seen him speak during this video. And I tuned in because normally I stopped listening at all to leftist progressive David Packman. And I will explain during this video why that is the case. But he brought Vivek on, and I thought it was too juicy to pass up listening to. So here we go. We're going to analyze this little interaction between David and Vivek.
24 Republican primary, also author of the book Woke Inc. Inside Corporate America's Social Justice Scam, which maybe we will have the opportunity to get to. I really appreciate your time today. I know you're super busy. I'm going to get right into what, fortunately or unfortunately, is often my first question when we speak to candidates right now. It's just sort of like a sanity check, which I think you will pass, honestly.
Let's hope.
Is there any way?
He's framing it in such a way that it's a sanity check. And if you want a good interview, then you have to agree with him. I'm just pointing out the tactic and how that with lesser interviewees can descend down the hill. Back to them.
Way to interpret that Donald Trump actually won the 2020 election, or did he lose the 2020 election?
The way you're framing the question, you're asking me a very specific question. Is there any way? Here's one important unexplored strand. Okay. The Hunter Biden laptop story and its systematic suppression. I'm a data-driven guy.
Really?
I'm a data-driven guy. And
really, he says in that mocking tone, really, as though it couldn't have possibly had any effect on the election, as if anybody as well prepared as David Packman would be surprised by such an answer. Again, this is why I don't like him.
And I think you probably are too, based on
absolutely
what little I know. So look at the polling data on the aftermath and before and after. There are more than enough people, it's not even by a super small margin, that say they would have changed their vote had they been exposed to that information before that election. The fact is that was systematically suppressed in what was probably the single greatest form of election interference in American history.
And
there was a lot of discussion.
Words,
if I may just finish, just to get the full frame of my view here.
Yeah.
There was a lot of discussion about the legitimacy of the 2016 election on the back of Russian election interference that actually, it turns out, was actually much smaller scale than surmised. But on the day of Trump's inauguration, there was a lot of discussion. Hillary Clinton called the election result illegitimate and said that it was partly the product of Russian election interference. Whatever that was, that pales in comparison, to the effect of the systematic suppression on domestic soil of a story that 2 years later, every news outlet in this country has absolutely admitted was indeed true when it was systematically suppressed at the time. So you ask the question, is there any basis? There's your basis.
And it is, do you have an opinion as to, is it the explicit pictures of Hunter that would have in some way changed people's minds, or the as of yet unproven claims that Joe Biden is involved in some kind of bribery fraud scheme? Or
I have to bring this up because it doesn't matter what Vivek believes is the reason. The fact is that the data supports his claim that many people would have changed the vote likely enough to have shifted the election, thus making it election interference. We don't have to mind read the individual people in order to know this.
Like, what about it?
So I'm not speaking for the survey respondents, but I can tell you what speaks to me.
Yeah.
Actually, because I wouldn't have changed my vote. I voted for Trump, right? So I wasn't one of the survey respondents who said I would have changed my vote because of it.
Good.
So here's what does speak to me, and I think it's relevant. Let's just take this outside the scope of political partisanship. The Burisma payments to Hunter Biden are a deep problem. $5 million paid by a Ukrainian company, privately owned by somebody who at the time was sitting on the National Security Council in Ukraine. Relevant now because it did result in an impeachment of a U.S. president who called, that was Trump, who called for further investigation of that in Ukraine.
Yeah, and the question is, why in the world would he be called out by Congress for questioning what now is very apparent that he should have been questioning. How dare you interfere with the deep state apparatus and the Bidens collecting their checks? That is the whole reason behind the original impeachment. Vivek is 100% right here.
But that wasn't the only geopolitical consequence of it. I think it has deep-seated implications even now for, say what many people on Russia's side of this say. Well, you have a U.S. president whose son was dealing, when that person was vice president, with actually the Ukrainian government indirectly, accepting what in any other context we would call bribes. So much so that President Obama's staff actually raised this with Biden, only to be shouted down by it. This is a bipartisan concern. That's a real issue. Also, the shell companies created to do business with China and the Chinese government, again, paid millions of dollars. That is relevant information on the eve of a presidential election.
Really?
When the fourth largest newspaper in circulation, the New York Post, founded by Alexander Hamilton, had its social media accounts locked for publishing a story where you and I would have had our accounts locked for even sending it via direct message or email. So I do think we have to go back and reconcile ourselves with that, have to reckon with that, admit what went wrong if we're actually to move forward in the future. Sweeping that under the rug and relegating that to be the concern of rubes that live in the middle of the country and are election deniers, I think is the wrong approach for us to heal as a country.
Yes.
I think we have to reckon with the fact that we did that as a nation. The United States of America, we let that happen. Admit that. Now, my view is nations make mistakes. You can move forward if you understand those mistakes, but we have to be open about them.
So not to stay on this.
Okay, now I 100% agree with Vivek, and what I love about him is that he looks ahead towards where he's going. He can cast the blame, and then he takes us towards the point that he's focused on, the moving towards point, not a moving away. We need to move towards something, and that is nation unification. This is one of the many reasons that I deeply admire him, is he can stay out of the muck in terms of the partisanship and focus on the direction of the mothership.
But to summarize, in terms of a factual vote dumps or sandwiches and ballots under the table or Vans backing in, Mike Lindell, cyber guys looking for bamboo fibers on the ballots, you're not talking about any of that. You're simply saying, had some people known about the allegations related to Hunter Biden at the time, enough people in some states might have changed their votes such that Trump would have gotten to 270. That's your position.
I don't understand why he's bringing this back to the vote gathering, whatever Dinesh D'Souza might have put out with 2,000 mules, etc. It's like he just needs his side to be asserted, and that Vivek side with that and then just say he's just talking about this one specific thing, because he's again trying to frame the debate over the 2,000 mules, etc., rather than what Vivek really said. He needs to interject that in.
Story had not been systematically top-down suppressed.
I gotcha.
I think there's good data to suggest it could have changed the result of the election.
Okay, good. And the point, again, is not to debate it with you, but to get your position on the record. Good.
It's data-driven, so it's not really
I'm super interested in your campaign, because you are right now one of the people that Donald Trump is saying nice things about in general. He mispronounces your name badly, Ramaswamy, which you may care about, you may not. That's for you to decide. But
it's been an affliction in my life, I will tell you. but I've grown used to it. Best efforts are what I appreciate.
He is generally saying the reason you're surging, he said this Saturday, is because you're actually mostly treating him well, treating him fairly, etc. You're roughly polling 5% right now, Real Clear Politics average. I'm sure there are anecdotal polls that have you higher and lower, but the Real Clear Politics average has you right around 5 right now.
I'm a distant third at 5.
You're a distant third at 5. You do seem to have taken a commanding position ahead of Mike Pence, though, and that we can talk about as well, maybe. My question is, from a practical standpoint, is your perspective on Trump calculated in order to sort of be there in case Trump really can't run a campaign because he gets arrested a third, a fourth, a fifth time, maybe even 6?
This is a really stupid question, because even if it was calculated in this measure, Vivek would not admit it. So what's the point in the question, David?
Is the idea not to turn off the MAGA voter so that if Trump hits trouble, they go to you rather than maybe DeSantis or somebody else? Is that a consideration?
It's not a political calculation. My whole political strategy in this race is to speak the truth, at least share my beliefs, tell the people who I am and what I stand for, and leave it to the voters to decide whether that's what they want.
Okay.
And so if I come out of this election where everybody in this country knows who I am and what I stand for, and that's not what they want, I'm at peace with that. I'm very much at peace with that.
I love this man.
And that's exactly
And
the
I
system
believe
working
him.
as it should. The more I learn about and the experiences I have, the more difficult I realize how hard that is for certainly me and probably any other candidate to actually achieve that goal. But anyway, the reason I'm saying what I am is I actually do believe that Donald Trump was an effective president. He was an effective president, no doubt about it. I think he was a good president with whom I agree on most policy questions. The reason I'm in this race is that, A, I believe I can take that agenda even further than he did and unite the country in the process. Because for whatever reason, and I don't blame him for this, but I think it's just a fact.
Okay.
That about 30% of this country becomes, I would say mentally ill in a certain form, psychiatrically ill.
I've heard you say that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you why they become psychiatrically ill from personal experience. My mother, when trying to decide, when I tried to convince her to vote for Trump over Biden, and I said, I don't understand how you could vote for Biden. The dude has dementia, et cetera, and everything else that I said. Why can't you vote for Trump? And she says, because I hate him, I hate him, I hate him. And the reason that she hated him is because the media over and over again implanted it into everybody's mind to hate him. It was a planned demolition of his reputation, and the media ran with everything that they could and hypnotized their audiences into finding Trump absolutely despicable, which is where Trump derangement syndrome comes from.
They agree with things that they otherwise wouldn't have agreed with. They start disagreeing with things they otherwise would have agreed with just because he's saying them. And I think that for whatever reason, I'm not yet having that effect on people, and I don't think I will.
No,
and that
you
allows
don't
us
seem to make
unite the
people
country.
crazy. The interesting thing about the psychiatric thing, your background is in, if I understand, undergrad biology and then business. Mine is in economics and communication. Neither one of us are doctors. But one of the interesting things is I was in Chicago last weekend. I was sitting very close proximity to a table of MAGA folks who were talking about the primary. And I was just listening in like a fly on the wall. It was an incredible sociological experience as a progressive. I was out of my bubble. And they start talking about, who's really in charge? It's Obama through the military. And then someone else says, the vaccines, this and that and the other thing. And someone else says, we got to get rid of the deep state. And one guy goes, who I like? I like that Indian guy. They didn't know your name. But they refer to you as that Indian guy because he's not part of the deep state, et cetera, et cetera. The definition of what we mean by psychiatric illness, a lot of the stuff I'm hearing from folks about JFK Jr.'s alive and all this different conspiracy stuff that surrounds MAGA, it seems as though when we...
I have a big problem with this because he's trying to equate the conspiracy theories on the right with the conspiracy theories on the left, like the Hunter Biden laptop is Russian disinformation, that the virus did not originate in a lab, but rather was natural origin, that you're a racist if you call it the Chinese virus. All of the conspiracy theories from the left, wow. I mean, conspiracy theorists on the right seem to be batting 38-2. They're batting 950. I don't understand where he's coming from in terms of equating this. I mean, the Hunter Biden laptop, I bet you that Vivek is going to say something about it alone, will account for this.
Start just saying psychiatric illness, I don't know if it gets us to where the country is and what would be best for it necessarily, which is why I wonder about this talking point you've come up with about Trump makes a third of the country psychiatrically ill. What are you getting at when you say that? That he's too divisive?
No, I think that I'm describing the fact of many people in this country disagreeing with policies that they otherwise would have agreed with, that I believe are good for this country, that Trump believed are good for this country, that they put themselves at odds with just because he's the person arguing for them. Like at the southern border, for example. I went to speak of Chicago, since I'll reminded me of my experience of going to Chicago recently.
You didn't sit next to these people I sat next to, I'm guessing.
No,
oh my God,
I share with you a commitment to get outside my own bubble too.
Yeah.
So I went to the south side of Chicago, where Republican candidates don't go.
Right.
So nearly 90% black audience, most of whom are viewed as deep Democrat country. We held a couple of town halls. I got my haircut at a barbershop. We visited South Shore High School in Chicago, which is partly being converted into an encampment for migrants who are crossing the southern border. I'll tell you what I found. I found some of the most ardent supporters of sealing the southern border who I have met in my life. Didn't come at a conservative MAGA rally. It came on the south side of Chicago. And I think that that's just one example among many. I found some of the fiercest opposition to our war in Ukraine, which, by the way, I share in common. And so I don't think the real partisan boundaries that the media teaches us to accept, those aren't the real divisions in this country right now. I think there are different divisions. They do not track traditional Republican and Democrat boundaries. That's an artificial projection.
Are they class divisions more so, or what are they?
Well, I see it as, I cut it through. I think there's some element of class division. I think that there's a deeper division between what I call the managerial class and the citizen. And I think the managerial class pervades multiple institutions. It's not just in government. That is what we call the deep state. And believe me, I care about this phenomenon and believe I understand it deeply. But there's a sort of horizontal managerial class. The same kinds of people, if not some of the same people, who are the associate deans of God knows what at a proliferating cancer of managerialism at universities, that professionally sit on corporate boards, that become the ambassador of God knows what to some third world, or sort of second bit nation as a gig that they take on. This is the undersecretary of God knows what in the next administration. It's the rise of the managerial class that wields far more power than our founding fathers ever envisioned. And I think part of what we're missing in this country is a 3-branch constitutional republic with 3 co-equal branches of government, where the people who we elect to run the government in the executive and legislative branches are actually the ones who run the government. That is not the case today. And so I have no doubt that, there's plenty of occasion for folks who step outside their bubble, whoever that is, to roll their eyes, and whenever they walk into that other room and walk out and dismiss whoever they heard as a bunch of crazies.
Well, Obama's still in charge secretly through the military. He's a little nuts, right?
Well, let me just that's facile. Okay. Let's just double click on that a little bit.
Sure.
What's the intuition? What's the intuition there? The intuition is that Joe Biden, the duly elected president of the United States, supposedly the person in charge, is actually in charge, making the decision.
I just have to point out that you can see the utter contempt that David Packman has for the mega crowd. And it's demonstrated in the way he speaks about them. And it's very, very good of Vivek to double click on this and investigate it further and explore the intuition that such people have. And I think he's going to go on here, and I'm probably going to agree with him.
I don't think he is. I don't think many people in the Democratic Party think that he is. I think it is a managerial class that finds him as a convenient vehicle for advancing a particular agenda.
Okay, but are there any of these examples you wouldn't defend? Like, we've gone to Trump rallies and they say Trump's actually still in charge because the generals swore an oath to him. Are you willing to say is there some version of that one that you think
Trump is not in charge? That's why he is taking.
All that Packman is doing is trying to castigate the other side. And it's like me going and saying, well, do you declare that not all cops are bastards to David Packman? Can you state that? That is what he's trying to do. And he just keeps hitting the same note. And it makes him seem to me to be rather partisan, which he is, and frankly unintelligent because it's not effective.
Great pains to run for president of the United States.
Okay, so that one's just wrong. That one you're not going to equivocate on.
But is it David or Peck? How should I address you?
You can call me anything you want, Vivek.
Okay, got it. I'll call you David. And thank you for saying my name correctly. It is Vivek. So
See how
Here's what I will say.
Vivek brings warmth
I think you
back
and I
to
share
the
this in common.
conversation.
I'll speak for myself, and I'll, give you the assumption to start with that you share this in common is
Sure.
we care about reviving a national identity and a nation we can be proud of that is united around the principles that set us into motion 250 years ago. That's certainly what I care about. I think that is still possible in this country. I don't know that 20 years from now it'll be possible. I think it's still possible in this country right now. I think you and I are not on the side of a national divorce. If that's the case, then we need to be able to pierce through what somebody, because I went on the Breakfast Club. I don't know if did you see that interview?
Saw it, of course.
Yeah.
We did deep prep.
I appreciate that.
Deep prep. This is what he says. And now I'm going to tell you guys why I stopped listening to him at all. The reason that I started listening to Packman originally is because I saw him just so prepped. And I think it was something to do with Reza Aslan. I'm not 100% sure, but somebody came on to defend him. And he tore that person apart, and she did not have any answers, and she was befuddled. And I was like, wow, this guy is prepped. And 2 times, years apart, he pretended not to know who James O'Keefe was, of formerly Project Veritas, now OMG. Anybody that does this much prep, whose political work it is completely disingenuous when he pretends not to know the name of James O'Keefe. The second time was on the Patrick Bet-David podcast, and that was recent. And I was absolutely flabbergasted that he would pretend a second time, the first time being Joe Rogan a couple of years ago, not to know who James O'Keefe was. So I find David Packman to be completely disingenuous. And that is the reason that I have great disdain for him.
Deep prep. I appreciate deep prep. So I had a moment in that interview where I could probably have done to this woman, I forget her name, what you might be able to do to the people who were in that room with you in Illinois, which is to take a speck of what she said and then just say, this is my occasion to bury her. I kind of had that moment on set with Don Lemon and decided to take it because that Don Lemon's different. That's not an objective. My question is, what's going on underneath the surface?
Yeah.
Okay? And I think what's going on underneath the surface in our country, left, right included, is that we are all starved, not even hungry anymore. We are starved for purpose and meaning and identity at a time in our national history when the things that used to ground us in our identity, faith, patriotism, hard work, family, these things have largely disappeared. That leaves a moral vacuum, a black hole in its wake.
Once again, Vivek points to the North Star and where he wants to lead us. And this is what leaders do. This is why I would vote for Vivek today over anybody on the presidential ballot that could possibly be there. He will address the problems and then point once again to the North Star, rather than the divisiveness of Joe Biden stating that the MAGA Republicans are a great security threat, the biggest threat to our country, etc. Vivek will point us to that direction and try to align us on that course to the new world in Christopher Columbus's case, to where he desires, where we want to go as a nation, united. That's why I have so much respect for this man.
And when you have a black hole that runs that deep, poison fills the void. And so what we need to do is to fill that void with a vision of, in my opinion, American national identity without apology, to dilute that poison to irrelevance. That is what we are starved for. As it relates to the conspiracy theorizing on the right,
sure,
that as you'll label, okay? So first of all, I think it's worth just doing a recounting of the last 24 months in this country, right? We were told that a virus that did not originate in a lab in Wuhan, if you said it did, that you were racist and had your social media accounts locked.
Okay, if we
now know
Vivek,
that it originated,
only
right?
because we have limited time and we've gotten this list so many times.
Yep.
I know where you're going with this, which is sometimes people have been wrong about certain things.
Not sometimes, many times would be my only point.
You see, again, he's equivocating. He's saying that it's sometimes. And by the way, I find I'm okay with Packman advancing the conversation. But again, this is a conversation that he wants to skip over. So he's using time as the reason to fast forward through this, because he does not want his listeners to hear the litany of conspiracy theories, quote unquote, that have been proven correct. he does not necessarily want that. And I agree with him that he does have limited time with Vivek, but it is also a conversation that he does not want to have.
Because
that's
I could go
totally
for a long
fine.
time. In the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And so we got to be on a point where I think that alone is prima facie evidence, okay, that it's not enough to just point to the ridiculous facial claim that somebody makes and sort of narrowly solve for, can you denounce that as false? You're playing the wrong game, especially against the backdrop that is not reading a room correctly.
Yeah.
Where time and again, and it is, and so you'll cut me off appropriately because you know the list as well as I do. But time and again, it has to be measured against the backdrop of every major instance that has been systematically suppressed has come out to have had some element of truth to it.
Fair.
And I think against that backdrop,
if it's okay with you, so I can hit a couple other things,
Yeah.
I want to leave it at, I think there's a difference between recognizing that, for example, how effective vaccines are against the latest variant is different than Trump is in control right now because the general swore a loyalty oath. As long as we can agree those are two different things and we can talk about.
He's strawmanning. He's giving, once again, the worst possible argument, the worst possible conspiracy theory from the right that is easy to take a needle and poke through that air balloon. He's just,
Both.
We
can maybe hit a couple other things. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Fair.
I think we're on the same page there.
Good. I have to talk to you about woke and wokeness. You wrote the book. It's in the title. One of the things I'm interested in when it comes to the anti-woke movement and woke as a cancer or a problem is that there's about a half dozen or more polls that show that wokeness seems to be the predominant perspective if you look at the whole country. I won't give you the full list, but just so we put a couple here, there's one poll from Pew, which finds that about 6 in 10 Americans say on the issue of going far enough, the right distance or not far enough on making trans people feel okay, not discriminated against, understanding their issues. 60% say we've hit the right note or we actually have not gone far enough. There's one from The Hill about 60% of the country is against any restrictions on drag performances. This is the sort of thing I'm talking about. Maybe you will dispute the numbers, maybe you won't, but those are some of the data I'm working with. Doesn't it seem as though the anti-woke idea is maybe overplaying a hand that might do well in some parts of the country, but won't win a national campaign, as evidenced by what Ron DeSantis is seeing right now, losing 42% of his support in the primary?
So I want to say something.
It's an interesting framing,
which I've said before, but it doesn't seem to matter, but I'm going to say it anyway. The media seems to be the one that uses a label of anti-woke to describe my campaign. I am running a campaign to revive national identity. And at the time I wrote Woke Inc.
Yeah.
You know what people criticized the title back then? People said, nobody knows what this word is.
Okay.
So at the time I wrote the book, that was actually the chief criticism of the title. And unlike many on both the left and right, I will define exactly what it is that I view as a symptom of a deeper malaise in our current.
I thought you were going to define woke itself.
No, well, wokeness is a symptom, and I will define the symptom, but it is also a deeper cancer. And wokeness is a worldview that says that there are certain invisible social relationships between us, grounded on a.
Just so you guys know, watching this, and I would love for you guys to tell me what you think in the comments, is watching two boxers go at it, and one is a world champion and the other is an amateur. I leave it to you to decide who I think is the world champ.
Oppression or oppressor relationships and statuses of people based on race, gender, and sexuality. That you're either oppressor or oppressed based on those genetic attributes, that there are invisible societal injustices resulting from them, and that we have to be awake, alert to those injustices and then correct for them. Left or right, I think that's a neutral definition that describes at least what we're talking about.
I have a different one, which is much simpler, which is simply becoming woke is becoming aware that there are problems in our society bigger than any one person's circumstances. That's how I define it. And
you see, the problem with his definition here is simplistic, and it doesn't account for the behavior that we're seeing. And so to defend what woke behavior is and the manifestation of it in the real world, using that definition, again, it's not applicable because it doesn't have the real world connotations. And also, that's not how anybody uses it. That might have been originally and kind of what Awake has become, but it's a very simplistic amateur boxer definition of the word.
I know it's very different from what you're saying.
That's a slightly different definition, and one that is set up for more people to agree with it. But I think that, but I think that's polite. Not. I respectfully, David, that's a definition that on its own does not support the specificity of policies that follow from it. Right, racial quota systems in boardrooms. The fact that a company cannot list on NASDAQ unless it has a certain number of quotas filled by racial minorities or sexual minorities on its board. That is a much more specific instantiation that closely tracks my definition of wokeness than a general definition that there are just vaguely some things wrong in the world that are systems that don't result from individual behavior.
You see, this is why Vivek should be president, because he takes the same idea that I had when listening to Packman, and he breaks it down incredibly cogently with brevity and specificity. And there is not anybody else on this campaign, save maybe DeSantis, maybe RFK. Joe Biden, of course, can do it, right? He can't even utter two sentences. Vivek's amazing, and just his intelligence level is off the charts.
Behavior. Well, okay, that's a big leap to get from there to racial quota systems, especially when actually in that very rule, and I'm just triple clicking on that just to get specific, but it is not an outlier. It is an example of what we see pervasively, where people then came back and said, well, how about veteran status or disability status? To which the government, the SEC and the NASDAQ said no, because that would reduce the desired forms of diversity on that board.
It's
so
racism.
We are talking about very specific instantiations of a culture that we can't just elide in the form of a general neutral definition that there are some unfair systems that we need to correct for them. That's not the essence of the claim that alone would support the range of policies that we see. And so I think we have to owe it to ourselves to at least be specific and get on the table, where I'll give Ibram Kendi at least some credit for being specific when he expressly says the right answer to past discrimination is present discrimination. The right answer to present discrimination is future discrimination. Those are his words, not mine. You have to take people like Ayanna Pressley at their word. We don't want any more black or brown faces that don't want to be a black or brown voice. I know that's a little bit uncomfortable to smoke out, because it makes a lot of my friends on the left uncomfortable, because they don't want to agree with those exact statements, even though they do want to agree with the more neutral definition of wokeness that you provided. But we have to smoke that out, where there are policies that directly track what the leading advocates of this movement have said in their own words. That's not me putting words in anybody else's mouth. And I think we just have to own that up and get that on the table so we can actually have an honest, clean-hearted debate about it.
Yeah,
right?
what's interesting about that is most of the examples you're coming up with as someone on the progressive left are not examples I would defend. And simultaneously, it sounds like you're also not denying that when it comes to the way we treat people, when it comes to the questions asked in these polls about wokeness, when it comes to trans, controlling books, drag shows, etc., I'm not hearing that that's actually the fight you
see. Controlling books, the only thing that they did in Florida to control the books was say that we're not going to allow pornography to be distributed to school children. This is a total straw man that Packman is developing. He's framing the counter argument to such books as you're just trying to control books. No, we're trying to stop pornography from being distributed to children.
Really want to have, which if that's the case, I like that. I think that that's good.
Yeah, well, here's the one fight on that narrow issue that I do care to have is as it relates to kids.
Okay.
So I believe that, and what I'm about to say is controversial to some, but I'm going to share my view, and I think it's grounded in history and fact and my true perspective. I think that gender dysphoria, especially in kids, is a mental health condition and should be treated as such. And for most of our history, all the way through the DSM-4, and I believe the DSM-5 has been viewed that way. When a kid says that their gender does not match their biological sex, that is usually evidence that something else is wrong in their life, and we should get to the bottom of that.
Yep.
I do not believe it is compassionate to affirm that kid's confusion. I believe that is cruelty. I believe 20 years from now, we will look back at allowing kids to undergo genital mutilation and chemical castration in the way that we would also judge Iran for doing the same thing. In Iran, if you're gay, you know what they do? They make you undergo genital mutilation and sex change. I think many gay kids are going through the same thing today because of the trans fixation in really American culture right now. I met two young women, Chloe and Katie, both of whom badly regret decisions they made to undergo double mastectomies and in one case a hysterectomy, as well as chemical castration. Chemical intervention. They will never be the same again either. I think that is barbaric, and for the same reasons that we do not allow kids to get a tattoo before the age of 18, we should not allow kids to undergo genital mutilation or chemical castration.
Now, of course,
the
you
age
can
of
get a
18.
tattoo before the age of 18 with parents' permission, and that's what many want to see.
Actually,
here.
many states you can't. And
I'm not aware of
that's-
any
yeah.
such states, but I take
Yes.
your word that there are
Yeah.
some where that's the case. I mean, listen, on that issue, and we're out of time, and I'm going to let you go because I know
I
that.
love how he equates getting a tattoo with genital mutilation and chopping off your ding dong or getting a double mastectomy. That is the equivalent of what somebody should get parental consent for in his mind. This is why I can't stand the far left. I just can't deal with it. I can't deal with the idea of having young children myself. I'm sure that many of you guys out there who have children feel the same way. Leave it in the comments if you do.
That you have a lot of things to get to on that issue. I do want to say that in every state I'm aware of, the issue of gender dysphoria in kids does start as a behavioral health intervention. I think the question becomes, and I don't pretend to have an answer to this question at this time. How far is it okay to go beyond that? I am with you that I don't yet believe we have the full 2020 hindsight on it.
The one thing I will leave with you on this too, and you seem like I appreciate your reasoned approach here to having a conversation, something I don't always get, is if gender dysphoria is such a condition of suffering, and I believe it is, in the rare instances in which it occurs, why on earth are we now going out of our way to create more of it? By purposefully weaving in the possibilities for gender confusion at ages where literally, and there's good evidence to back this up, when there's one case of gender dysphoria in a school, it spreads. Like you could do the R-squared math on this, right? It's like you could compare that to COVID, the spread of COVID, and you can epidemiologically model this stuff. Yes, this is actually having an effect that we're going out of our way to create a condition that we say creates more suffering. I'll give you one example in New Hampshire, where I travel frequently. The state just shot down a piece of legislation. All it said was, if a kid in school identifies as a gender different than their biological sex, the parent has a right to know. And over a lot of activism and opposition, they shot that bill down, which is odd because the whole premise is that kids are at heightened risk of suicide, in fact. And so a parent doesn't have the right to know if their kid's showing up in school with the condition that the whole premise for the movement was the kid is at higher risk of mental health condition or suicide. It says there's something else going on here.
Yeah,
right? This is not compassion.
We talked about one of those laws recently. I expressed the same concern, which is I understand the two forces here. The idea of we don't necessarily want to, quote, out a child that is not ready or maybe outed into an unsafe home environment on the one hand.
Out a child who is not ready. Let me tell you something. If you have even decent parents, they care more about that child than anybody else in their life. The reason they don't want to out the child, some of these people, obviously not all, is because they want more time to sink their claws into them ideologically. I firmly believe that. And again, I find these people to be absolutely demonic.
The other side being exactly what you're saying. So I think all of these issues are more complicated than both
and David,
sides.
Before we rock and roll, not on this, but on just a synthesis of this conversation, I just feel, I'm on a mission to lead not a political party, but a nation.
Yep.
And I will share with you a commitment that I'm willing to make. And I hope that provides some inspiration to people who disagree with me on many issues like yourself. I
hope you're not about to offer me press secretary.
Oh, you're so funny,
we
David.
have to get to know each other better before I make that offer.
Fair.
But maybe you're on the short list. I don't know. But here's what I'll say.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that we all need to do better of smoking out the best argument for the side that we actually disagree with, to contend with that, not with some caricature of it. And so I, for my part, believe that I'm doing that in this campaign. And if you spot an instance where you think I'm not, then get that on the table. But what frustrates me, and it does frustrate me, is that I see a lot of and I know this world, man. Like I came from it, right? I graduated from the top of my class at Harvard. I've been through Yale Law School. I'm working at a hedge fund in New York. Like, let's just get real here. Like, I know you. We haven't met before, but I know you in some sense of the word. Okay. Like, you're not unfamiliar to me. And what I see amongst even my peers, right, is a form of laziness. I think I'm saying this out of respect and not an attack, in a constructive way. I saw a little bit of it in the start of this conversation, right? Where you're going to be able to smoke out a version of that which can be caricatured, but these are our fellow citizens. And their concerns come from a deep place where if you can do a better job of articulating and smoking out where that concern comes from, then we have an obligation to do it. And that's what gives me my motivation in this race, where people will say somebody...
Again, it's the amateur boxer versus Muhammad Ali. And I'm going to bet on Muhammad Ali every time to knock that MFer on your left out of the proverbial debate.
Live in 50 miles radius of where I am in central Ohio today and say, well, they say the First Amendment applies to tech companies. They're rubes because they don't know that that only applies to the government. Actually, to double click on that and say, you know what, there's something to that intuition. And it turns out if a private actor is doing what the government actually implicitly goaded them to do, then the First Amendment does apply. In every instance, to be able to say that when there's something of value there, don't just sweep that under the rug and reject it, smoke it out, and then let's have that real debate.
I
and
think
with respect
that's
to the
a
woke
fair
or trans
point.
case, I'll do the same.
I
am
think
doing the same. That's
listen,
what we got to do.
I'm with you in general. I think 3 times now you've deliberately blurred very different types of issues. We have a real situation in this country where a whole bunch of people think Trump either won or is currently the president. It's very different than tech and First Amendment. We've got to leave.
I really wish that he would leave that alone, because all he's doing is offering up straw men. He's not debating. He wants Vivek to come over to his side and assert that what he's saying is 100% correct for his audience. And then he glosses over, again, despite bringing up all these straw men, actual real evidence of conspiracy theories on the right, so to speak, that turned out to be correct regarding COVID, regarding the Hunter Biden laptop, et cetera, but he doesn't want to have that discussed.
Leave it there. That is a disagreement we have about the similarity between those situations. I could talk to you for another hour. I want to be respectful of your time.
But thank you, man.
Vivek Ramaswamy, he's running for president on the Republican side. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, my man.
Well, guys, there you have it. And again, you saw Muhammad Ali, sparring with the amateur boxer and absolutely crushing him, even just with his gentle jabs. And believe me, he kept them gentle, because that is who Vivek is at a politician. Again, what I so admire about him, and something that I'm not able to do, is that he's able to keep pointing to the North Star, to where it is that he wants to go, and to lead a nation rather than fracture. And you see some of that with RFK, but I think that Vivek is even better at it. So Vivek is number 1 on my list of presidential candidates. I donated to his campaign. I think the world of him. And I hope you guys do. I hope what you guys take away and let me know what your thoughts are, that America is better off with Vivek Ramaswamy at the helm, because I judge him based on the merit of his character. So all you people that called me racist over the years because I defended merit, I am defending the brown guy running for president because I believe that he's the most meritorious, and you can put that in your pipe and smoke it.